Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. I'm Vesna Dimitrievska. I'm a coordinator of global education initiatives at Indiana University's School of Education and the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies. And today I'm here with my colleague, Liana. Would you like? Yeah.
We're glad that you are joining us for this session, and we hope that will be beneficial for you.
Yeah, great. So I'll just start sharing our screen so that we can go ahead with with our presentation. So our topic today is Global Literacy Invitations, Africa Across the Curriculum. This is just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about the reasons why we should teach globally and what we then making local global connections, globally competent teachers, talking about globally themed picture books, and then specifically about the Global Literacy Invitations and some examples and samples and experiences that we have had by having this type of professional development for teachers. So when we think about global and international, if you would like in the chat box, if you don't mind, if you don't have to, if you don't feel like it, but when you think about global and international, how do you distinguish between the two? So what's the difference between global, international, and intercultural? How do you use them interchangeably, or do you use them in the same way? Or do you have a separate definition for each of those? And I think, yeah, you're welcome to put that in the chat box, but for the sake of time, I think I'll just go ahead and talk briefly about these, about how we frame and how we use these terms. So by global, we mean something that transcends borders. By international, we mean the nation states approach. The multicultural relates to enhancing or advancing equity and inclusion in a single society, whereas intercultural usually means being able to communicate across cultures, whether that is in one single society or across the world. When we also, just to frame our work, I just wanted to share some of the definitions that we use in our work when we talk about global learning. So one of the definitions comes from the Florida International University, and it is, and they define global learning as a process of having diverse people to analyze collaboratively and solve complex problems that transcend borders. Another distinction that ASCD and the Longview Foundation make is between global competence and global learning. Global competence usually refers to a set of knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are necessary in order to thrive in today's interconnected world, whereas global learning is the act of developing global competence through intentional educational activities. And I want to emphasize that the intentionality that is associated with global competence and global learning, that it is not enough just to want to be global teachers or to nurture global readiness among our students, but we do have to be intentional in the types of activities that we create and the types of opportunities that we offer to our students to engage in. So when we talk about also global learning, I think it's worth mentioning the 21st century skills. In the 2011 OECD report, there was a significant reporting on how there is a change in terms of the demands of the student skills. And there is a huge difference in terms of the student skills that the students of today and that they have, and what we, maybe when we were students in elementary school, and the skills set that was nurtured at that time. Also, there is an increased need for critical thinking and problem solving abilities. And in terms of literacy, there has been a shift from defining literacy from purely being labeled to learn to read, to reading for learning. And then there is also an importance of creativity, innovation, and collaboration. In 2012, the US Department of Education, in fact, added a global component to its definition of 21st century education. But when we think about and we talk about these things, when we think about American students, are American students globally ready? And are our teachers globally competent so that they can prepare then students who are globally ready? This quote from Dr. Albright. This is not Madeleine Albright, the politician, but a professor at a university in Texas. She says that what we call global education here in the United States, the rest of the world simply calls education. Another framework that I wanted to share with you, and you may be familiar with this, but I know I certainly wasn't until recently, that in fact the US Department of Education has this framework for developing global and cultural competencies in order to advance equity, excellence, and economic competitiveness. And this framework is for early learning, so for pre-kindergarten, for preschool through post-secondary level of education. And then we can see how they talk about 4 domains of global and cultural competencies, and they are collaboration and communication, world and heritage languages, diverse perspectives, and civic and global engagement. And then this, I think, framework is useful, and it can be used both as a starting point, but also as a checkpoint, like a reality check in terms of how we are doing and what we are doing. Because as a starting point, if someone does not know where they can start, it does give a good starting point in terms of framing what those 4 domains are, and then what each of those domains looks like across the educational pipeline and level. So why a global focus in education? So this latest report from ASCD and the Longview Foundation emphasizes these 4 kind of trends. We know that the careers that about, I think 60% of our students 60% of the job that our current students will have in the future do not currently exist. So are we preparing the students for jobs that we don't even know that will exist in a few years? But it's definitely that idea that all those skill sets and the competencies that we were developing in ourselves when we were students are not the same ones that we develop in our students today. Also, we also know that today, more than ever, more than any period in time, it's much more easy to connect to people from across the globe at a lightning speed. And at the same time, because of all time, maybe not currently because of COVID, but in terms of historical periods, we are at an all-time high in terms of global migration. And as a result, there is a huge demographic diversity. And at the same time, we're all experiencing cross-border challenges. Currently, COVID-19 is an example. It's a good example, I think, to show how it's not a matter of choice. Even if we want it or not, we are all affected by it. So those pandemic challenges associated with climate change, also economic imbalances and differences across the world. So all these different 4 trends emphasize the need why we have to have a global focus in education. This same report also emphasizes that in order to be globally competent school leaders, so not just the teachers, but anyone in the school, that it has to be evident throughout these 7 tenets. So it's not just what's happening in the classrooms. It's not just the pedagogy and the practice. It's not just what's reflected in the curriculum, but it has to be evident in the schools or district's vision and mission. It has to be also evident in terms of the situated action. Although it is important to have global connections and collaboration, it is equally important to engage in advocacy and community engagement at the local level. So the local cannot function without the global and vice versa. Also, there has to be certain systems and structures in place for all of these other tenets to function and exist and operate in a meaningful way. We just here use an example from Indiana. We know that this is a national workshop, and we may have attendees from across the country, but we want to emphasize that you can help find allies to tell you the story, or if you need to convince someone about how we need to be globally engaged. So this is just an example, and this specific map, we use it a lot as one of our print allies. It's from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and it shows that even though we are the flyover state and we are in the Midwest, we are global. Out of the 1,300 companies, almost 1,000 companies are foreign owned in Indiana. So it's pretty opening when you see these flags that we are global, whether we agree about it or not. Also, 2 years ago, there was some colleagues of mine here from the Center for the Study of Global Change in Indiana University engaged in this Indiana Language Roadmap, which was a project to map out what is out there in terms of the educational offerings for students, but also what kind of needs exist at the business level, what kind of legislator there is. So there were stakeholders from education, from the business, from the legal, there were at this part of this project, and we talked about what's needed, what is out there, what is needed, and how we can make that happen. And what this report, what this roadmap revealed was that 1 in 5 of Indiana jobs are supported by international trade, and that includes both imports and exports, and that these are top 5 foreign-owned companies that employ most of there are other ones, but these are the top 5 countries that have foreign-owned companies here in Indiana. Another interesting fact to me as a language educator is that there are 275 different languages that are spoken in Indiana. But are we valuing those? Are we bringing the students' heritage in our classrooms beyond just one single culture night? Another thing was that most of the teachers, educators, and administrators who were part of this project agreed that world language instruction is important or very important. And just as a contrast, 21 of the top 25 industrialized countries in the world begin language instruction in elementary school. We know here that the default is that if students are lucky, that might start in middle school, but primarily it starts at high school. And I always think about, well, what would happen if we introduced math in high school, just as a contrast for the language instruction and how early it should start. This is another thing that I'm inviting you to think about. We talk about culturally responsive, and even now, not just culturally responsive, but culturally sustaining instruction. So if you can just, and De La Garza and Levin, they talk about these 3 levels of, some of you might be familiar with this. It's the Salsa Dancing in Gym Shoes. It's a book. It's primarily about Spanish speaking students and Spanish heritage students, but it is it makes our point really well. So they talk about 3 levels of culturally sustaining instruction. So if you can just take a minute or to think about what might go under inclusive level, and what might go under transformative level. You could be thinking, for example, whether there is teacher-centered or learner-centered instruction, whether there are picture books with diverse characters, what types of assessment they have, whether they're only assessed with multiple choice, or whether in terms of the types of instruction, whether it is always the teacher who is lecturing and the students just listen, whether they're active or passive, whether we bring guest speakers, and so on. So what they talk about, what the authors of this book mention, is that this exclusive level is kind of like the basic level, and nothing is wrong if this is the only level that is happening, but I think it's good to know where we should be heading. So in terms of this exclusive level, the only focus of our instruction is on food, fun, folklore, and fashion. And in our work, we often talk about the 5 F's of culture. So it's nothing wrong that you start with these 5 F's, but then what do you do with them? Do you only do one culture night and that's about it? Or do you do something more with them? Usually in terms of the types of instruction that goes with this, it's very teacher-centered, lecture-based. There's a lot of reading and multiple choice exams. So we are very kind of limited in terms of the instruction and the types of assessments that we use in the classrooms. In terms of the next level, this is a kind of like the enhanced or better level to strive for is that we bring guest speakers or texts which are written by individuals with varying perspectives or social views, but the instruction is still pretty teacher-centered, even though there is encouragement to employ critical thinking and some peer learning in order to construct their own value systems. The one level that we should be all aiming for is this transformative level, in which there are both formal and informal activities across academic space and time. So it's not just what's happening in the classrooms, but what happens beyond the classrooms. Are we motivating our students to do research or investigate beyond their classrooms? So this type of instruction is characterized by being student-centered. There is a service learning component in many of these projects or types of work, a lot of problem solving. It's students are responsible for the types of topics and projects that they engage on, and that makes a huge difference. It'll be very different to do and engage in a project or learning that makes a lot of difference in my own life versus to what something the teacher does or tells me to do. And also there is a lot of self-reflection and self-assessment. It doesn't mean that the other types of assessment do not exist. It's just that all of these types of instruction and assessment should be varied, and we should value self-assessment and peer assessment as much as the other types of assessment. This cultural iceberg, you may have seen this before, but it does emphasize this cultural, the iceberg concept of culture. I know that people use this for different things lately, but it is when we see an iceberg, there are parts of the iceberg that we see on the surface of the water, whereas there are some other things that are below it. So those 5 Fs, the food, festivals, fashion, and the famous people and the flags are maybe what's at the top of the iceberg, the surface culture. Whereas the shallow and the deeper culture are the things that cannot be seen. So it's not visible in the food, or if we bring some kind of if we talk about flags or the dress, or if we talk about even music, but then what do we do with that? So those 5 Fs can be good as an entry point, but then how do we use them to reach to these deeper cultures, deeper levels of culture, so that we talk about attitude, so that we talk about different types of values, about roles in family, and so on. And just to kind of like emphasize that there are certain myths that are associated with global learning, that in order to be a globally competent teacher, that you have to travel. If you travel abroad, then you are a globally competent teacher. But that is not true. And this is, in fact, the most of the work that I do. It's called internationalization at home, that you do not need to travel abroad in order to be a globally competent teacher. And then some people would like to travel, but they maybe don't have the means. And but some people don't even want to travel. But that does not mean that they should not be a globally competent teacher. That traveling or that mobility abroad is not maybe an indicator of how globally competent the teacher is. Some people also say, well, I don't have time to include global learning in my curriculum, and that this is the notion that global learning is seen as an add-on, as something extra that people should be doing to what they're already doing, and that's also not the case. And the global literacy invitations help us send this message and exemplify how global learning can be used in the curriculum without sacrificing the standards and the curriculum that is already used in the schools. Another myth is that I don't have funds to create global learning experiences for my students. Also, this is another myth, because there are a lot of networks, a lot of PLCs that are used and that people can join, that are free and available for free for people who want to be a globally competent teacher. Global learning is the same as global competence. This is just from that earlier distinction that global learning is, in fact, is the vehicle to global competence. We know we need to be engaging in global learning activities with our students in order for them to become globally competent. Global competence is only important if you're going to leave Indiana or any state where you're from, and that's also not true. That, as I said, being locally aware but also globally engaged is crucial and the pandemic. I keep using the pandemic today, but it does make our point very well. The global learning that does not connect multiple disciplines. This is not also true. Global learning, it lends itself to these cross content area connections. This is why we think it's a good thing to do with our students. So I'd like now to give the floor to my colleague, Liana. Liana, go ahead.
Thank you. To continue on with the conversation that Vesna started, we're going to be looking at a strategy that uses children's picture books with a global theme. I'm going to give you a few minutes to kind of read through some of these points here, and then I will add to it. Okay, global picture books promote engaging conversations. Students become world travelers by exploring and learning about the history, the geography, the language, traditions, and culture of people in parts of the world. The illustrations give our students a visual interpretation and can also start meaningful classroom discussions. Globally themed picture books are powerful teaching tools and are full of endless teaching and learning possibilities. And we are focusing today on looking at children's picture books that could be used from 3rd grade through 6th grade, even into higher levels. Children's picture books are not just always for primary grades. So we'll go to the next slide. Take a few minutes to read this over, and then I'll explain. All right, our focus today is going to be on global literacy invitations, but we have to first start with the word invitation. What does invitation mean? And you can see the term comes out of critical literacy, which is a learning approach where students are encouraged to examine various texts to understand the relationship between language and the power it can hold. On the left side, you see the critical literacy's objectives for invitations. And on the right side, you see the global literacy invitations objectives. The GLI, which we call global literacy invitations objectives, actually expand upon the critical literacy objectives with more of a focus on global learning. Okay, ready for the next one? As we share some examples of global literacy invitations today, you will see how GLIs go beyond the 32 pages of a globally themed picture book. Global literacy invitations are not commercially produced. They are teacher created and a product of teacher research and creativity. Teachers take on the role of learner and researcher in order to create these rich invitations. Each time we begin what we call the invitation creation journey, we remind ourselves that we can't teach what we don't know. So teachers have to be researchers to be able to create these rich invitations. So let's look now at what are the components of global literacy invitations. Give you a few minutes to look over. Invitations take students into related themes or content areas that are not specifically mentioned or addressed in a book. In other words, the invitations expand and enrich the story. This is where the teacher as researcher, learner, and also teacher as creator all come together. So now let's look at the next slide. The first step in selecting a book to use for creating global literacy invitations is evaluating the cultural accuracy and authenticity and the presentation of the book. Despite the recent increase in the amount of globally themed picture books being published each year, it is still a small minority of the overall number of children's books that are published in the United States. Selecting picture books from unfamiliar cultures requires researching the backgrounds of the author and the illustrator to determine their relationship to the content of the story. There are numerous resources online to help teachers with this. There's authors' websites, interviews, videos in which authors share their personal connections to their books. So Vesna, are we ready for the Jamboard?
Yes. Now in the chat, I'll add the link to a Jamboard. And I'm not sure if you have used the Jamboard before, but I'll explain before using it. So maybe let me share the screen before you click on the board and go there. So this is what the Jamboard would look like. And this is the question we have for you. When we say South Africa, what comes to mind? And we want you to use this sticky notes feature. So click on the sticky note and you can choose a color, whichever color you want. And then you can write an answer to this question. When we say South Africa, what comes to mind? And you can say whatever, this is just a sample, and then you can save this and then that will appear there. Just be careful when you start doing that. You might be like on top of someone else's sticky note, so feel free to move the sticky note anywhere on the Jamboard. So I'll stop sharing now, but feel free, and I'll see you all in the Jamboard.
It's saying access denied for me, so I don't know if you need to edit the sharing settings.
Okay, let me change that. Sorry about that. I thought I did that, but okay, maybe it should be good now. Yep, I see people coming in. Great. And let me remove my sticky note.
Okay, are we ready to go on?
Well, can you, you cannot see what they're seeing? Yeah, let me, well, I don't want to share the screen because
yeah, no, some people are still having problems accessing.
Can you refresh and then try again? So people are saying Nelson Mandela, the apartheid, highly colonized, Trevor Noah, most southern country. Liana, can you see it?
No, I can't.
You can click on the link and then you can see what people are.
Okay, which link am I clicking on?
On the chat, in the chat, the one that I.
Oh, in chat?
Yeah, can you click chat and then you'll see it there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Can you see it?
Hold on. No.
That's okay.
But that's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, no, people, I would just wanted to see, well, let me share so that you can see how amazing it is.
Okay. 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 Yes. Kosa and penguins of the Cape of Good Hope, Haile Soweto. Great. Okay. I think, Vesna, they are ready for
they are
ready for our next part of the adventure of Global Literacy Invitations. Great.
Yeah. So what we would like to do next is you can go back to our main screen. I mean, you're welcome to add things to the Jamboard, but it was just to engage in some interaction with you. And the next thing that we would like to do is to share some experiences with one of our Global Literacy Invitations graduates. So Liana, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, Karen Goldstein is actually one of my former undergrad students at IU. She is now a 5th grade teacher in Cincinnati and has been teaching, I think, 4 or 5 years, she'll tell you. And she is also a member of the Global Literacy Invitation teacher team because we do presentations and present workshops throughout the state. And so she is going to share her experiences, and she also has invited some of her students to participate.
Yeah, now let me. Sorry about that. Multiple screens.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen Goldstein and I'm excited to be here with you virtually today. I'm going to be sharing some information about GLI and teaching globally and just what it means to me, how I use it, why I use it, and why really is the foundation of what I do as a teacher. So one of the biggest reasons that I teach globally as much as I can is because I have noticed in my classrooms that my students are coming into school with such a limited view of the world these days. They just are not getting outside of their own homes and backyards and cities, especially now with COVID. They have even less of an opportunity to travel and go anywhere outside of their own area. And I am always so shocked at how many students don't know the difference between a state and a country and can't name the 7 continents. And I just feel that they have such a limited view, limited knowledge of what is going on in the world around them. And so I find it as my job to really help push them to see those things that they are not usually seeing. And when you learn about GLI and teaching globally, it should not be considered something that's like just another thing. You know, we have so many workshops and professional development, and we get all of these new resources. But for me, it's not something that is on top of my plate. It really is the plate. Okay, it is the plate. It's the source of support for everything else that you're doing. Using GLI teaching globally, it helps build character and empathy. We're really preventing ignorance here. We can see what happens in our world and in our country when people grow up without learning about people of other places and people that look and sound different than them. So there's just so many good things to come out of teaching globally. And what I also want to share with you is how easy it is to do and incorporate into what you're already doing. So again, it shouldn't be something that is now on top of your plate. It is the plate. It should be part of your regular curriculum. It's not in addition to your regular curriculum. So because I am teaching virtually this year, I'm 100% online. I've had to obviously adjust a lot of all of my instruction and what I'm doing. But I still, even with adjustments, try to teach globally as much as possible with my 5th graders on Zoom. So an example of something that I did on the very first day of school was we read this book that's called Rain School by James Rumford. It is about children that are in Chad in Africa, and they show up for their first day of school and they find that there is actually not a school there and they have to build the school themselves. They show up and there's no building and it's just the teacher and they build the school on their own. And you can imagine with 5th graders how much conversation that led to, with all types of questions about why do they have to do that and how do they do that? And of course, that's so different from what we know because we just show up to our school and there's already a building there. So by teaching globally, we're opening their minds to things that they have never even seen or heard of before. And I think 100% of my students had never even heard of Chad, barely knew that Africa was one of the 7 continents. Africa's not a country, and just learning so much more about it. So when we use these really rich global picture books, you can do so much with them. It's not supposed to be a story that you read once and you answer questions about it and then you put it away the next week. It's supposed to be something that can come up as a theme over the next several weeks and months and even throughout the year. So when I used Rain School, we started with the usual. We had discussions about it. They did answer some questions. We used some graphic organizers to think about our thoughts and did some video responses. We did some of the basics. And I also wanted them to learn a lot more about Chad itself and not just the one story. So one thing that I noticed about this story with Rain School is that it really does perpetuate some stereotypes about Africa, because it takes place in a poor area. The children don't have much, hence they're building their own school. But not all of Africa is poor. Not all of Africa has dirt roads like the book portrays. So I wanted them to get over some of those misconceptions and stereotypes and learn more about Chad and all of Africa outside of what we think we know about it. So I give them some videos, sent them on some video tours to be watching. We read other stories, a couple other stories about places in Africa. So there's so much really rich picture books that you can use. And I'm going to read you some of the responses that some of my students wrote. I compiled some of their responses, basically asking before you learned about Chad and other places in Africa and afterwards. So examining those misconceptions. Here's some of what they said. Before, I didn't even know about Chad, so I didn't know anything about it. I learned that it's actually really pretty. I thought Chad was a poor country until I watched the videos. Now I see the capital city has super rich hotels and museums. I thought everyone had to walk everywhere. I didn't know they had cars. Literally, someone didn't know there were cars in Africa. I thought it was a small country like a village that didn't have many people in it. Now I know there's actually 1 million people living there, and it's the largest landlocked country in Africa. I thought at the beginning that the people in Chad were not as fortunate as we were, but I have realized now that they just have a different culture than we do. And lastly, I thought everyone had to build their own schools, but I see that not all schools are built by kids. So some very basic misconceptions that we were able to take a look at and say, that's not actually true. I mean, all of those things that you see in movies or that you think about Africa, it might not actually be true once we really start to explore it more. So again, these are things that you can do with your regular curriculum. If you are doing summarizing or inferences or theme or main idea, whatever you're doing with your regular curriculum, why use a random story when you could use a really rich global story and be able to teach about so much more than just inferences and main idea? So there really is so much that you can do with this. And throughout our studies of global literacy and teaching globally this year, we have looked at a lot of different things. So we started on day 1 with Rain School and learning about Chad and Africa. Something we've also gotten to recently is the refugee crisis, and we've looked a lot at the Middle East and countries in Africa and how people are moving and why they're moving because of war and violence and all sorts of horrible things in the world. And these are 5th graders, and they're learning about the refugee crisis and why it's important to know about it. You know, we have refugees here in Cincinnati, so there are people around us like that. And another really interesting thing that happened with my class this year was one of my students had a personal connection, and his grandmother was actually from Cambodia, and she was a refugee in the 70s during the Cambodian genocide. So my students learned about the Cambodian genocide, and their family actually came onto Zoom and did this entire presentation about Cambodia and about what it was like to be a refugee leaving and coming to the United States. So we got a really cool kind of in-person view and personal connection side of the story to hear about that information. So there's a whole lot you can do. It's not just reading a book and closing it. It's exploring, learning more about the country, from traditions and food to the history and the politics and how it affects us in the United States. And there's just so much more that you can do with it. So lastly, I want to show you some of my students' video responses. So I actually shared with them that I was helping with this presentation, and I wanted you guys to be able to hear from my students directly how they feel about learning about different countries and, and how that's going for them. So I'm going to show you their responses, and I asked them a few questions. I'll show you just part of what their responses were. The first question I asked them was, why do you think it's important to learn about other countries? And the second, what are some things you didn't know about Africa before you learned more about it? So you are going to hear from 5 of my students, Tori, Olivia, Roberto, Gavin, and Joey, about what their thoughts are. So let me pull this up here.
I think it's important to learn about other countries because then you can know how the world is shaped, kind of learn a bunch of history about the world and the people who live in it. And like you can learn about people in general too. When I was learning about Africa, I learned that it isn't a very small country. In fact, it's quite big. It doesn't really have too many villages. It normally has cities, actually. So.
Hi, my name is Olivia, and today I'm here to explain why it's important to learn about other countries. I believe it's important to learn about other countries because you get to learn about other people's traditions and cultures. For instance, I didn't know anything about Africa. Africa is a continent. Africa has 54 countries in it. And there is over 1.6 million humans there. I didn't know that at all until my teacher, Ms. Goldstein, taught me. A way a teacher could help students understand.
I think it is important to learn about other countries because I get to learn about the people, their culture, and their traditions. Learning about those important things help me to understand who they are and what they enjoy. Learning about other countries help me to know about how I may offend them and how to respect them who they are. Some things I learned about Africa I didn't know before are their culture and traditions, such as them being spiritual people. I got to learn more about their clothing and their dance. I think teachers should have.
I think it is important to learn about other countries because we live in America where many cultures are mixed and may interact with several languages and cultures and religion. With that have to be said, we also have to learn how to respect each culture. I think it is important to learn about other countries because it can teach students how there is a difference in our world. One thing I didn't know about Africa before my teacher taught me more about it was that elephants were dying and being rescued every day. I think.
Okay, so that was just some information from some of my students on how they felt about learning about other countries. And you heard some things that they were talking about specifically about Africa. For example, the last one, Joey, was talking about elephants being killed because we also looked a lot at poaching in different countries that had an effective poaching in their area. So that's about all I have for you today. I hope you are excited to teach globally and have a great rest of your workshop today.
Let me stop sharing this and go back to our PowerPoint. I can see that there are comments in the chat that Antonia, who is in fact a graduate of our project, is saying he's glad that we're sharing the student's perspective. And I think that's one of the beauty of the GLIs is that we want to hear from the students and how they're experiencing this, because the learning is happening through the sharing as well. So let me share the screen for our next part. Liana, did you have anything to add?
No, it's, as you said, hearing the voices from the students. And Karen has done a phenomenal job of incorporating global literacy invitations into her curriculum and meeting all of the objectives and things that she has to do. She has found it as an easy fit. So here's the big question. What are global literacy invitations? And I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of go through and just give you an overview on it. And then we will actually look at some and see how they're all put together. Globally, literacy invitations go beyond the 32 pages of a globally themed picture book. Invitations, we know, are inviting, and they are inviting students to be creative. They are inviting students to be inquisitive. They draw students in with their creativity, creative and interesting format, and you'll see the format shortly. You will notice as we review global literacy invitations, the students' learning tasks are at the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, asking students to create and to evaluate. The concept of invitations may be new to students and will need to be taught and modeled. We suggest that teachers create an invitation for the first time that will be a whole class experience. To familiarize students with the formatting as well as establishing expectations for collaboration. Students can create retrieval folders for keeping track of their work and invitations, but invitations are not meant to be graded. We do encourage teachers to set aside time for teacher-student conferencing and sharing to see what the students have done. Teachers have control of this because you are creating this and you are creating it for your students, knowing your students. So let's now look at what we're going to be focusing on today. So the global literacy invitations are the extension of a class read aloud experience. As with any good read aloud, teachers introduce the book with a hook, something that draws the students in and piques their interests. A possible hook for globally themed books is always locating the continent and the country on a map or a globe before reading the story. But teachers now are talking about using Google Earth, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, to locate the country and to zoom in on it. And they find that this really is a great hook for sparking students' interest before doing the read aloud. Sharing information about the author and the illustrator before or after reading the book is also another critical component. As I mentioned, a teacher read aloud is a shared experience that launches the global literacy invitations. I would love to share a read aloud with you today, but because of time, we won't be able to do it. But I will just do a short summary of the book, The Day Gogo Went to Vote by Eleanor Suzuki, which is the book that we use to create the global literacy invitations that we'll be reviewing today. As we review the invitations, you will note that other supportive texts are used to extend the story and bring additional information to the story. We encourage teachers to create what we call text sets, which include books, articles, artifacts, photographs, pictures, or any other materials that will add depth to the invitation. Let's start with a little background information first, though, about the author before we do the summary of the book. The Day Gogo Went to Vote by Eleanor Suzuki is a previous winner of the Children's Afrikaans Book Award. The Children's Africana Book Award is presented annually to authors and illustrators of the best children's and young adult books on Africa. Eleanor is a human rights activist and a political activist. She is a leading supporter of the role of culture and the humanities in South Africa and in the country of her birth, which is Zimbabwe. Sisulu is a strong advocate for programs to promote the development of a love of reading with children. The Day Gogo Went to Vote was published in 1996, and it is Suzuki's only children's book that she has published. But in 2011, she did publish Walter and Albertina in Our Lifetime, which is the story of her husband's parents who were at the forefront of the struggle against apartheid. Walter was the Secretary General of the African National Congress and was sentenced with Nelson Mandela to life imprisonment for 26 years behind bars. The day Gogo went to vote was inspired by Eleanor's experiences working at a polling booth during South Africa's 1994 democratic election, the first election where Black South Africans were allowed to vote. The story is narrated by a 6-year-old South African girl named Thembi. Thembi lives with her family, including her 100-year-old great-grandmother, Gogo, in the township of Soweto. And Gogo means grandmother in Xhosa and in Zulu. When the family hears the news that South Africa will hold an election and Black South Africans will be allowed to vote, Gogo announces she will be going to the polls too. Gogo is frail and in poor health. Still, she is determined to vote for the first time in her life. With the help of neighbors, family, and a man with a car, Gogo and the family are driven to the polling place. When Gogo comes out of the voting booth, Thembi is surprised to see a crowd of people who are clapping for Gogo. Thembi's mother notices her puzzled expression on her face, and she explains to her that people are here taking pictures and clapping for Gogo because she is the oldest resident in Soweto to vote. This story of quiet determination pays tribute to the people of South Africa and the privilege of casting a ballot after apartheid. It is interesting that the word apartheid never appears in the story. Nelson Mandela's name is mentioned only twice. We could just close this story. I could read the story to our students and just close the book. But if we do, we are missing a global teaching opportunity that goes well beyond the pages of the book. Just think about the rich conversations that would be missed. Think about all the themes and the topics and the opportunities for students to explore and to learn more about the African continent and the country of South Africa. So this is where we will go next. Let's actually look at some global literacy invitations. So Vesna, we are ready for our next slide. As we said, we go beyond. Hold on just a minute. I want to make sure I'm on the right slide. This is 20. Yes. Okay. All right. As we share some of the examples of the global literacy invitations, you will see how GLIs go beyond the 32 pages of the globally themed picture book. Globally literacy invitations are not commercially produced. They are teacher produced, as we said before, and they, you know what, excuse me, hold on. I am in the wrong space. If you give me just a minute.
This should be your slide 28.
Yeah, it's the books to share. I've got it now. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. All right. First, take a few minutes to look at this display. This is a display of an invitation that has come out of the book of that we gave the summary for of the day Gogo went to vote. The displays is a critical visual component. We want students to be drawn into the invitations, and the display needs to pique their interest and their curiosity. This invitation is inviting students to go beyond the story that they've heard and develop a deeper understanding about South Africa. Two new themed related books are introduced in this invitation. One is Shaka, King of the Zulu, and Shaka Zulu, Who United the Tribes. You can go to the next one.
Well, now we'll go to the actual invitation, right, to the document.
Right, yeah.
So before I show that, or as I'm doing that, I wanted to just share that with the invitations, that from one single book, there might be multiple invitations, what we call global literacy invitations. Today, we'll be sharing several that Liana has developed. And this first one was called Books to Share. So you saw the display. And now next, I'll share the actual invitation that is in this document. So, and Liana will go over and talk about it. Can you see?
Yes, I can see. Yeah. So the invitation here, you will notice, I'll give you a few minutes to read over it. All right, this invitation was created because at the beginning of the book, and the day Gogol went to vote, before the story starts, the author has included a glossary and a pronunciation guide for the reader. She also gives a brief narrative about the 11 mentions the 11 different languages that are spoken in South Africa, and an explanation about the Xhosa and Zulu names and colloquial expressions that are used in the book. She also informs the reader that Xhosa and Zulu are the two major dialects spoken in Soweto, where the story takes place. The invitation, Books to Share, gives students an opportunity to learn more about the history of the Zulu tribe. Students are encouraged to read, explore, think critically, and respond to open-ended questions, as you see. This invitation is more of a conversational invitation between two students or a small group, giving students an opportunity to share their thoughts and questions with others after reading the two books. The last task prompts students to create interview questions and post their response on a class message board. So you can see with this, it really fosters, gives an opportunity for students to explore beyond the 32 pages of The Day Gogol Went to Vote, and to learn more about the Zulu tribe and the Zulu people and just the history. So these are a text set that will go with the book. Okay.
Now we'll share the second invitation.
Okay.
This one is called African Folk Tales.
Yeah. All right. Again, here is a display for it, showing all of the parts to it. You can see graphic organizers are used. And another thing that I didn't mention, these invitations, we try to make them where they're portable, and they are put on, you'll see we're using filed folders. It usually takes 2, maybe 3 filed folders put together and to put the invitations out there so the students can actually take everything that they need, the books, whatever supplies that they need to complete the invitation, and move it to another part of the classroom or out in the hall or wherever they're going to go. Some teachers even put them in crates, put everything that they need, all the invitation materials and supplies, books, in a crate so they can just easily move it around. And some teachers have them where they're set up in their classroom. So that's where teachers have, they are yours to make them work for your classrooms. Okay, so this is the setup for this one, you can see. So let's look at this one. Nelson Mandela's name is briefly mentioned in passing in the day Gogo went to vote. We know the pivotal role Mandela played in freeing South Africa from apartheid. The book, Nelson Mandela's Favorite African Folktales, introduces the reader to Mandela's love for African storytelling. The collection begins with a very lovely foreword written by Mandela that sets the tone for a collection of folktales from across the continent, giving students an opportunity to learn more about the countries of Africa through the tradition of storytelling as they browse the collection. So let's show the invitations.
Sorry for the multiple
Ads.
switching back and forth.
As we are sharing this, if you have any questions, please, put them on the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of them at the end. All right, so this is the invitation. And can we scroll up a little, Vesna? Yeah. Give you a chance to kind of glance over it. All right, this invitation shows a variety of formats that may be used in structuring an invitation. It presents students with open-ended tasks and also includes an optional challenge at the very end. Note that all the tasks support differentiated instruction, meeting the needs of all of your learners. Again, conversation and collaboration between learners is encouraged. Also note that the graphic organizers are used in place of worksheets. Vesna, I don't know if we have a picture of the graphic organizers or not.
I think we do. I don't know why it doesn't show here.
But let's go back to the top, and I'm going to look at, let me pull mine up here.
I'm sorry that for some reason.
No, it's fine. What I'm going to do is just, oh, here we go. I know, because it might be hard to read the task. I'm just going to read the first task to you.
Okay.
It is always interesting, and this is what the children would read. It is always interesting to browse through a book before you read it. With a partner, take a picture walk through Nelson Mandela's favorite African folktales. Take time to explore the table of contents, the map of Africa, and the foreword by Nelson Mandela. Learn even more by reviewing the glossary and about the author and artist at the back of the book. Here are some questions to think about as you take your picture walk. What do the illustrations tell you about the story? Do you recognize any recurring themes in the story? Do you notice anything interesting about the formatting of the book? What intrigued you as you looked through the book? Share your thoughts and questions with your partner. So you can see there's no pencil or paper here. This is just, again, children working together. This is probably with a partner exploring and sharing their thoughts. The second task is, with a partner, select a few of the African folktales to read together. Each of you can take notes as you read your selection using the tablet graphic organizer. So included in, I don't know if I can hold it up, included in the invitation, there is a graphic organizer that looks like a tablet. It also, where else? Discuss your notes with your partners. If you encounter, did you encounter unfamiliar words? What parts of the folktale were unclear to you? What life lesson, moral, or value did you think the folktale conveyed? So again, open-ended, not just one response. And then the last part is, the invitations, the tasks usually become more difficult as they go along. And you'll see when we present the others. One thing that we have found, some teachers ask children to do all the tasks. We really like the students to be able to decide which tasks they want to do. Some students may only do the first task, some may do the first and second, some may do all of them. So again, they have ownership in it. The last task, which is a little more difficult, folktale elements help us to think more deeply about what we're reading. These elements also make stories more interesting for us to read and hear. Working with a partner, choose a folktale to read from the book. What African country does the folktale represent? What information about that particular culture is reflected in the tale? What literacy elements give the most information about the country or the origins, the country of origins, belief, moral values, connection with nature, and the history of the people? And then at the bottom, it lists the elements of a folktale. So there's a lot in this. And then the last part is the challenge one, and it's challenging the students to become a storyteller. And it says create a storytelling presentation, and it also gives them the tips for good storytelling. The invitations are something that we've set out, you put out in your classroom, and teachers always ask, how long do we leave them there? And the response is, it's shelf life. Teachers make the decision when they think that it's time to put another invitation out. I'm sharing 4 invitations today that support the one book, The Day Gogol Went to Vote. We would never put all 4 invitations out at one time. We would put one at a time and then add to another and then add another. You notice the last one, the challenge one, is always something that students can do with a partner or they can do alone. So let's look at another one.
And this one is called Struggle for Racial Justice.
Right. All right. This Global Literacy Invitation is supported with, again, with a text set with additional text. It also has an information folder, teacher made, that has primary sources and documents and primary quotes in the folder. Apartheid lasted in South Africa for 50 years, and The Day Gogol Went to Vote takes place in 1994 at the end of apartheid. South African adults and children had been protesting against the racial inequalities of apartheid long before 1994. This invitation invites students to learn about children's participation in the struggle for equal rights in South Africa in 1976 and in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. The invitation is supported with 2 powerful award-winning picture books. Adrian Wright's Hector, A Boy, a Protester, and the Photographer That Changed Apartheid, and Monica Clark Robinson's book, Let the Children March, the story of the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama. Students are invited to read both books and learn more about these 2 struggles for racial injustice. Many times when we have an opportunity, if it's a natural fit, we try to bring in something that the children are familiar with, the children stateside are familiar with, and show the similarities and differences that we have with other countries and with the issues that they're dealing with. So let's look at the invitation. Struggle for Racial Justice. And while Vesna's pulling it up, okay. All right, many times in invitations, we add additional information. And so we kind of like to use the did you know box or informational box. So this invitation starts with the did you know question, with a set of did you know questions, giving students an opportunity to think about the connections between apartheid in South Africa and the civil rights movement in the United States. The invitation tasks are open-ended, giving students the opportunity to respond at their ability and ability level and it supports differentiated instruction. You will note that in this invitation, the tasks are scaffolded and tend to become more complex. Remember, students will be working with a partner or in a small group. So many times having support, group support is very helpful for our struggling students. I'm not going to read you all of the invitation, but you can see a few of the parts there. Looking at the first one, starts out with your partner, have a conversation about the did you know questions. What question or questions sparked your interest in learning more about South Africa and the United States shared history of civil rights for all? And then it just continues to go down, and it has the students looking at the apartheid and Jim Crow folders, which are filled with information about the discrimination laws in both of the countries. So, and then the challenge at the end on this one is, this is a challenge task for you and your partner to share what you've learned about South Africa and the United States struggle for racial injustice. And here are some creative ideas to consider. They could produce a play, they could produce a podcast, they could write a play, they can merge the two stories into one. They can design a graphic representation of the struggle. So there's just a lot of options that they can do at the end to show what they know. Okay.
And our last one is called African Book Adventure.
Okay. All right. This one is, again, bringing in outside books. This brings in some informational texts. The South Africa book is an absolutely beautiful book with real photographs of South Africa. The Amazing Africa is a country by country page, and gives factual information and little stories about that particular country. So both of it's a nice pairing, because they get to have an overview of Africa, and then they get to zero in on South Africa, where the story took place. Oh, on the display for this one, you'll notice that we are using more information is added, and it is inviting the students to take a picture walk through the books, and then to use the two QR codes to watch kid-friendly videos that will give them a tour of Africa and South Africa. They can also read the Did You Know That fact cards that are up there for South Africa and the African continent. And this invitation gives students ownership in exploring their own interests and what they can do with their new knowledge, and how they can share what they have learned. Okay, and let's see if I can read a little bit from this one.
Liana, did you want me to share?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I just pulled it up here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, this one, the first task is, it is always, oh, yeah, you've got it there where we can see it. Okay, I don't have to read it to you. You can see the task. I apologize. This is a learning curve for me, presenting virtually. But you can see on the first task, they are, encouraged to read the Did You Know cards with their partners, and what facts did you find interesting? And then the next one is having them to look at the two texts and having them pick out what information they are finding interesting, what they're learning that's new. Think of a way you and your partner can research to learn more. So this invitation is really a springboard to get them into researching more about something that is catching their attention, either about the continent or about the country. And again, at the end, we always try to encourage students to share what they know. So here is, with new information you've learned, consider creative ways to share. Oh, these are the fact cards that are coming up. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that hopefully gives you kind of a taste of what global literacy invitations are. I know it's when we do these workshops, they're all-day workshops that we go through presenting this with teachers, so you're just getting kind of a quick overview. But if you, and we'll say later, and I'll say it now too, if you have any questions or want to, about creating global literacy invitations, our emails are there, and you are more than welcome to email me. The Day GoGo Went to Vote is a single story with much more to be told and shared with our students. Global literacy invitations take students beyond the 32 pages of the story. If you have not watched the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, we encourage you to do so. If you have watched it, please revisit it. It speaks to the goal of global literacy invitations, going beyond and expanding upon the single story of a globally themed picture book.
Great. And then before we look at some of your questions, this is the Padlet that we promised with the books. The Padlet is in fact, let me stop sharing and then I'll put these in the chat and we can talk to all of you. The Padlet is links through Amazon. Of course, we're not promoting the books, but it was the simplest way to share these books with you. They are hyperlinked on this Padlet. And as we mentioned earlier, you're welcome to, maybe you're familiar with many of these books, you're using them, but we, Liana and the team of teachers that we're working with, they are working and revising the books that we use a lot all the time. And we're making sure that, as Karen mentioned in the video, that some of the books do not reinforce some of the stereotypes that exist out there. So that's the Padlet that I'm sharing. And then the second one is in fact a Google folder with the packet of our presentation. And now we can talk with you. We can answer some of the questions that are in the chat, but before—
And Justin, may I just add,
Sure.
the Padlet is just a sampling. We couldn't get all of the books on there. I've really found that there are more books coming out about African countries that are just outstanding. So this is a good sampling. My suggestion would be to follow these authors. There are many authors here that have written several books, children's books, about different aspects of the continent of Africa. So I encourage you to find an author that you like, and then just for a book that you like, and then zero in and look at the other books that they have published.
Yeah, and what I was going to share an experience that how we ended up, in fact, I think we didn't mention anything about the background of this project, how it all started, that Liana has been using global literacy invitations with her students for many years with her School of Ed pre-service teachers. And then the person who was in the position that I'm currently in, they talked about it. And then we said, well, why don't we start and do this for in-service teachers? And from the first time we started offering this for in-service teachers, we saw how transformative it was for the teachers, because we noticed how not only that they were engaging the students in these very meaningful experiences, the teachers themselves were learning a lot about these books. We do this project with not just with books from Africa, but from all over the world. And we have heard of some of the teachers saying, well, I didn't know that this was a country. And we see the teachers usually once in the fall term for a full day workshop when we introduce them to the global literacy invitations. And then each teacher chooses a book and they go back and then develop literacy invitations around that book. And then we expect them to use the books with their students so that when they come back in the winter term, we talk about what it was like, the process of creating the invitations, the process of using them with the students, what they learned, how the students reacted. And we are always blown away when the teachers come back and they share how transformative it was, not only for their students, but for themselves and personally and professionally. And it happens all the time. And so far we have had like 3.5 cycles of the project. We couldn't finish the last one because of COVID, but we are planning something virtual, because the beauty of these invitations is also flipping through the invitations and going through the folders that the teachers create and using artifacts and so on. So Liana?
Yeah, to piggyback on what you're saying, it started out when I was doing this with I was teaching elementary social studies and literacy, and I was fortunate to have a cohort. I had the same students for both. And so when we started doing the global literacy invitations, I would go to the library and check out 60 or 70 globally themed books and bring them back to the classroom, and had the students select a book from the selection that I made, being a little controlling because I wanted the very best in books for them. And so they would browse the books, and many times they'd pick up a book and they said, well, I don't know anything about Afghanistan, or I don't know anything about India. And I said, good, that's the book that you need to pick. And so, because as I mentioned before, to do this, a teacher has to be a researcher. You have to put yourself as a learner, as a researcher, before you can create the invitations. Because you notice the invitations aren't just retelling the story of the book. It goes way beyond the book, way beyond the book. So the students would research, they'd come back, and I was always, like we are with our teacher participants now in the GLI project, I was always blown away by what these undergrads were able to do. And so I have a feeling, because like I said, Karen was one of my undergrads, so it makes me feel very satisfied to see one of my former students carrying on doing, supporting her teaching with using children's literature, globally themed books in the classroom. Now, as just a quick note here, when you create your first invitation, keep it relatively simple just for your own sanity's sake. But I will guarantee you will go back and redo and retweak and just recreate it. The invitations I shared with you today for the day Gogo went to vote, it's my second set of invitations for this particular book. I wrote the first set as a model for my students probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I just, looked at it and thought, no, it could become even richer. So when you're working on them, you're going to find out you're never satisfied. You almost have to I have to cut myself off sometimes because you get into it. So, and the more you research and you find more information, the more you keep expanding upon your invitations. I have one book that I did, and I started out with 3 invitations, and I think I'm up to 9 invitations now from a very simple children's book that takes place in Siberia. So just jump in, and it's for me, and I hear from practicing teachers saying it's so rewarding, and you get to be creative, which from what I understand now, that you don't have that many opportunities in your classroom to do. And you can certainly justify it and make it work to fit your curriculum and meet your ELs and your standards that you have to meet, because it does incorporate history and science and social studies. It's all of these things that you can pull out of the book. That's all.
I don't know if there are any questions or if people have any thoughts or if they're doing something similar. There's a question about a place where all the invitations are already made and can we have access to them?
Do you want to answer that or do you want, oh, you know what, I'm going to answer that. The invitations, as we said, are not commercially produced. And so teachers create them for their classrooms for themselves. So we hesitate in sharing what we have created because, again, it takes the background knowledge to be able to present the invitations to your students. And so if we just hand out the invitations, it is just, and the teacher doesn't have the background knowledge for it, it takes away from the richness of them. So to answer the question, unfortunately, no, but we encourage you to create your invitations. And Vesna, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we are hoping to publish them and make them available in that way. But I think also there is another question if there is a template to fill in info. I think that's the other thing, that the beauty of it is that there isn't a template. That there
you get to do it. You get to create it. This is the creative part. You get to do it. You know, you saw some of the samples today, and they weren't all the same. So you get to be creative and figure out how you want them to look. The main thing is you aren't using worksheets. It is all open-ended. You try to scaffold your invitations, and you also try to always have some kind of challenge at the end. They are structured where children work with a partner or in a small group to do them. But again, you have to teach your students how to use invitations, how to do an invitation. So you could take one of these invitations and do it as a whole class easily. And then once they get the hang of it and they understand it, then they can go and do it on their own. More questions?
Yeah, there is one great question. How do we avoid?
I just want to give a 2-minute warning because it will kick us off at 4.
Okay. A quick one. How do we avoid or uncover our own unconscious bias when we create the invitations? I wonder about this since when we choose the books or the questions, even after researching, we quite likely still have unconscious biases we bring on the project.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I really don't know how to respond to that. Do you, Vesna?
Not really. Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. Yeah, we do best what we can. And I think using multiple sources, checking in with people from the respective countries, if possible, or experts. People here at IU, we're open to being contacted, and our African Studies program does a lot of outreach in K-12 schools, and now I'm sure virtually too. But I think that's the key, that you should know and you can rely on networks that are already out there. And so that it's not just that one single story or one single interest, but then making it work from multiple perspectives and multiple sources.
And I see someone is talking about the time factor with using global literacy invitations in the classroom. Somehow teachers have been able to figure it out. I mean, I've been out of the classroom too long to make suggestions, but they have been able to figure out how to work it into their schedule, into their curriculum, and it's working.
Great. Well, the time is up, but I'll put my email in the chat, and we're happy to talk to you about this more. We are happy to, you can email us with any questions, and we're happy to, as I said, talk more to you about this and help you in any way we can.
And I'm going to add my email.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you so much, Diana and Vesna. We are going to break here for 10 minutes. Your next session starts at 4:20. This is the last session of the day, your 4:20 session. Please stay on to fill out the questionnaire after the last session. You must fill that out to get your professional development points or your certificate of participation. Then there's a 1-hour break from 6 to 7 before the 7 to 9 p.m. showing of the documentary Black and Black, which is optional for those PDP points. but we hope you'll all be there. So thank you so much again.
And thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you. We hope to hear from you.
Bye.